What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 396 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher here with Drew Dinkmeyer to talk a little bit of Olympics. And we finally got the big Lauri Markkanen news we were waiting on. We'll talk about the ramifications for the Jazz and some other teams who are looking to trade. Maybe we get the wheels turning a little bit there and some possible fallout. With me to break it down, as mentioned, Drew Dinkmeyer. Dink, how's it going?
It's good. Yeah, our schedule got a little thrown off by Tropical Storm Debbie. Knocked me out of power for a few days. I was visiting the family. Glad to be back home and in New York. Glad to have the Olympics behind us and start moving into training camp stuff, around the corner and some of these other news tidbits. So excited to have this little lull where we've done a lot of projection work and we're getting ready to, announce stuff that we have coming up that we're really excited about. So it's a nice little time in the calendar now. We have a little bit of a without basketball time, but a little bit of time to digest our lunch before the main course and the NBA season starts up.
Yeah, I opened up my my spreadsheet for the 150. I'm going to start working on that this week and get the ball rolling there. But yeah, I had a nice little trip to Vegas for myself. Also pushed us back a little bit. I actually won money for playing in Vegas, so shout out to me. I got to say, I had a really nice run on the craps table. And it was such a good run that people around the casino were calling me Steph Curry because I kept shooting. And I was like, oh, babe, I felt so proud. It was so good, so good. Yeah, going off as a shooter on the craps table is all time. So, hey, that could tie right into the lead we want to talk about here, just Steph Curry and the magnificent close. I mean, I don't know if you saw I posted in our Slack the French commentary saying Steph Curry's the devil. That was so good, but I thought he should have won MVP, given the way that we would have been dead without him against Serbia. And then obviously he closed the game out in magnificent Steph fashion. Just any sort of thoughts on Steph and just the fun factor that, I think you and I agree that there's nothing better in sports than watching Steph and Curry go off. So anything you just want to add on Steph's just virtuoso performance?
I think we both have had a special place in our heart for Steph Curry and the Warriors over the last, decade in terms of the place that they've occupied in the basketball sphere. And I found myself, I'm usually sort of unattached, to the results of the Olympic Games for the basketball team and whatnot. They're kind of expected to win. I like seeing when the games are competitive. I found myself sort of emotionally attached to this run. I think it became kind of evident in the last few games. We're just probably not going to see a lot of really meaningful basketball from LeBron James and Steph Curry the rest of the way. And these guys have provided so many incredible moments on the basketball floor over the years. And Steph, who this is the only Olympics that he played in, to have that be the way that he finishes off his Olympic career, most likely. I think it was wonderful. And I got just a little bit emotional just kind of watching Steph enjoying that experience, watching LeBron kind of enjoying that experience, watching KD enjoy that experience. This is a generation, an era that is starting to age out. And I think it makes it because the Olympics is every 4 years, it feels more imminent than it does when an NBA season ends, right? Because you're just oh, well, there's the next NBA season. We'll see if they play. But 4 years is a long time. And maybe some of these guys make a heroic effort because it's in LA. If it wasn't, I don't think that they would at all. And I still don't think that they will. But yeah, it was beautiful to watch. I'm so grateful for the ambassador of the game that Steph Curry has been, both on and off the court during his tenure, and for him to get that kind of moment where, hey, he spent his whole career being sort of underestimated in terms of where he stands in the history of basketball, and sort of you've got staunch defenders of Curry and how high he gets on the all-time list, and then you've got people who are very he's system oriented and he's just a shooter and he doesn't have this and he's not this, and he's been so compared to LeBron because it's been LeBron's era, obviously. But it was pretty cool that game on the line in the biggest moments, both of those guys at kind of the end of their career, they both are taking sort of turns being the alpha in the big dog on the court. And Steph in the gold medal game was more alpha than I think we've ever seen any player with the 4 threes to basically close it out. So it was an unbelievable performance. When I was cackling, I threw my as I was watching, and he took the last heave, I like threw my glasses in the air and rolled over on the couch, just like cackling, like, oh my God, Steph is incredible. And my wife's like, 87-year-old Greek uncle is like, what is happening? This guy just makes everything. And I was like, yeah, this is what he does. Yep. He just makes everything. So it was very, very cool.
Yeah, I was watching it at a bar at Planet Hollywood on like a huge screen. Great environment. A lot of people cheering on. It was really, really fun experience for me. And yeah, just so good, man. Like I was tearing up, man. Like it's just this sensory overload. You're like, oh my God, like I just teared up because it was just so exhilarating and just like exciting. And like I said, it's the best. Like Steph going off is the best overall. Any other Team USA stuff? Do you want to talk about Tatum's minutes being cut a little bit? And that's all over the Twitter. I think it's so stupid. So I don't know. I don't think there's really anything else to take away from Team USA that's worth mentioning.
Yeah,
but I guess the one takeaway is LeBron still has it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the takeaway with respect to Tatum is more about 2028 and just like, does this damage the relationship and and that's up to Jason. And obviously both Jason and Jalen, have probably frustrations with Team USA after this Olympics. And like you look ahead to 2028 and what's going to be the heart and soul of American basketball. And you've certainly got Anthony Edwards, you've got Devin Booker, hopefully Bam Adebayo is still at that point, but you look around after that and it's like, I mean, we might be talking about Cooper Flagg at that point. We'll see. But it's 2028, the U.S. Olympic team is going to look strange if the relationship is fractured in any way, shape, or form with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, because those are the American stars that are kind of in their prime right now. I think 4 years is a long time. I think things will be very different the next time it goes around, but that's the only thing that I think is worth conversing about. Somebody was going to get left off in terms of playing time. They won the gold medal. I don't think you can they didn't lose a game. I don't think you can really argue when that's the result. So, I know people will say like, oh, they could have won by more or whatever. They did the job that they needed to do. And somebody was going to be disappointed with their playing time when it's all the best players in the world.
Yeah. Serbia shot the freaking lights out, man.
Until the fourth.
Yeah, until the fourth, and they had the lead obviously, and then USA and LeBron and stuff just kind of carried them there.
Which by the way, in that Serbia game, we talk about like Serbia shooting the lights out because we remember like early in the game, Serbia shot 39% from three, the USA shot 50% from three that game. USA shot the lights out even more than Serbia did. So it's crazy how that shooting variance, which look, they're not equivalent shooters on the two teams. So you don't want to say like they should shoot the equivalent percentages because like Devin Booker and Steph Curry and Kevin Durant are not the same as Petrushev and Abramovich. And like, it's not the same, but one team shot 50%, the other team shot 39%, and USA barely squeaked that out. And that's just like, it's wild, man, what Jokic can do. Yeah. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. And then one other point, I know you were a little bit more concerned than I was about the overall toll of, so much basketball. Does Tatum not playing and Brown obviously not playing?
Yeah.
Does that help a little bit in your outlook for Tatum?
I think so. Yeah. I it's still a lot of mental hurdle, and maybe this is more of a, mental hurdle to get through, but certainly having the physical toll, like, I think it's meaningful to just not have extra minutes on the body after they've played deep in the playoffs, like every year of their career basically, and just won a title and like just finally climbed that mountain. So I do think from a, looking forward standpoint, I think there's reason for more optimism there, and probably a little bit more concern for Drew. Just because he did play, pretty meaningful minutes during the course of the Olympics.
Yep. So let's go up north and talk some takeaways. Sam and I had talked about this when we did the podcast kind of previewing the last two rounds, but we wanted to get your take, and I'll add mine again really quick. But Jamal Murray looked horrible. One of the worst games I've ever seen him play to close out their season. I'm moving him down. Like, I was so discouraged by what I saw that I'm gonna move him down. Like, he did not look like himself. I know it's only a small sample, all that, but what are we doing with this really rough run from Jamal Murray?
Yeah, it's tough. He's supposedly healthy, but the last time we saw him in the NBA, he was kind of grinding through an injury, and then when we see him in the Olympics, he's not really getting to his spots with the force or the quickness that you would expect. The shooting variance is like, that's a small sample thing in terms of just a couple of games, but But as you alluded to, the look in terms of his ability to quickly kind of get to where he wants and create the separation that he wants just fell off. And he just looked a step slow out there. So he's and I don't think we'll see much of him in the preseason. Like, I don't think Denver's going to play him a bunch of the preseason. We'll probably get one preseason run through for him and Jokic, but I will be paying a little bit more attention to how he looks in the preseason in whatever limited time we get than after coming off of this, because my antennas are up as well. And, from just a projection in the spreadsheets perspective, the only thing that I could think of is in terms of what I could dock, I think of is maybe the games played. Like, maybe there's more lingering injury risk than before, but yeah, it was not a good Olympics for Jamal and a very disappointing result for Team Canada on the whole.
Yeah, he was kind of sputtering a bit in the last series. Obviously, went off on a high note with a 35-pointer in Game 7. That wasn't enough, but I don't know, just tough given the way he's been missing time. It took him a little bit longer than I thought to get over that hamstring injury last year. So, yeah, definitely moving him down for some games played risk. Again, maybe this all goes away. Maybe he looks totally fine. And I think it's probably more likely that he's fine. But there's downside. Like, you got to weigh in the downside when we're playing fantasy and looking at stat outlooks and all that good stuff. On the flip side, his teammate, which someone I also talked about, RJ Barrett, looked really good. We saw him handle the ball a bunch with Toronto down the stretch before they kind of tanked it up. But yeah, do you think that RJ Barrett's play to close out last season and the Olympics can boost him up from a fantasy perspective and overall stat output?
I'm hopeful. I think the thing with RJ is we have seen so many glimpses. Like, there's been 4-week stretches for RJ in kind of each of the last few seasons where you're like, oh, is he figuring it out? Like, this is really exciting. And then it sort of regresses. And so just because we've seen it like stop and start so many times, I'm hesitant to believe this is like a full growth that we can really lean into. But I'm also, because we've seen it stop and start so many times, I'm intrigued that like, hey, like, he keeps tapping into this level of play. At some point, maybe that just becomes the next new level that he's at. And for me, the key with RJ Barrett, and I've talked about this a lot before in the past when talking about the Knicks trade and different things, is just decisiveness. It's just like getting the ball and going. And too many times in the NBA, when he's struggled, he has just kind of sat with the ball. And because he's not the most skilled guy in the world in terms of like shooting touch, in terms of handle, in terms of creation, he needs to lean on his athleticism and just attack the rim. And I saw more of that during the course of the Olympics, but those are all the best stretches we've seen in the NBA are kind of highlighted by that as well, that along with some better shooting and stuff. So he will be in a role where he will be asked to be pretty decisive with the ball with Toronto. So I'm hoping that we will see that version of him. And maybe there's more freedom playing a little bit higher up in the pecking order on a team that, isn't under the same spotlight as the bright lights at MSG, where he was a younger player at kind of being vaulted into the top of the pecking order. It's not quite the same thing with Toronto. So maybe that'll allow some freedom for him to be a little bit more decisive and aggressive in his play.
And then they did convey the Spurs pick. So I think that there's some tanking risk is what I'm getting at here.
Yes.
That's probably my big concern, given the way that they don't really have – they have Scotty Barnes, and then kind of like, they paid him into it quickly. They need another player, so they could be risking on the tank. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit when we go to Utah and all that good stuff there. Nikola, so a couple of the young guys who could potentially have big minutes coming their way, and Bilal Coulibaly and Nikola Jovic kind of didn't do anything. Coulibaly, like, barely played, didn't handle, didn't have any chance to score. And you could see this is why I was pretty down on him coming in, because he's just really, really raw. A year later, with all the NBA experience, we haven't really seen him. Didn't really make he saw more stat output late because they were just missing so many guys. But, hasn't really shown he could kind of be a guy that, we talk about second-year breakouts all the time, but he doesn't really have the profile there. Do you think that Bilal Coulibaly, with Denny Avdia gone now, could maybe carve out a bigger on-ball role or even just some sort of offensive role?
So I think that's absolutely in the cards. And they're going to give him all that he can handle in terms of development this year, because what else are they trying to do on that team, right? It's develop Coulibaly, it's develop Sarr, and try to move forward. I was hoping we would have seen maybe some offseason jump for both Jovic and Coulibaly, who both have like clear paths in front of them to take on big roles. I don't want to say like not seeing it in the Olympics means we won't see it in the NBA, because I don't think that's the case at all. I just was hoping we would see it in the stage. Now I will say, Serbia, bronze medal, France, silver medal. These two countries were prioritizing winning now at all costs, right? So like they're making some decisions where you're seeing like a lot more Evan Fournier than you'd probably see on a team that's maybe, playing for the development of the team in the future in terms of the Olympics. So some of this stuff you could write off to like, these are just competitive teams. They want to lean on the veterans who have Olympic experience a little bit more. But some of it you could certainly point to like, hey, they didn't take the step forward quite as much as we were hoping for. Coulibaly did play more against the United States just because they were like, we need the athleticism. Like we just need NBA athletes out here to defend. But it wasn't super impactful. And we saw, throughout, whether it was Cordonier or Ntilikina, both kind of playing ahead of Coulibaly throughout kind of the medal round and the group stage, and a little bit disappointing there. I just thought that was a roster that Coulibaly could have made more headway on.
Yeah, and he wasn't like very good down the stretch either. 51 true shooting, shot the ball pretty poorly down the stretch with the more minutes. So you like to see a little bit more efficiency improvement, which was actually okay to start the year on much, much lower volume. So yeah, and then we'll see what's up with Jovic. Obviously, the illness thing could have affected him. Given all the opportunity, going to have more opportunity here without Caleb. So he'll be on my 150, I think, just because I think that they need their production there, especially if you have the contingent upside of Jimmy Butler possibly going down. So definitely someone I'm going to be ranking in my 150 would be Jovic, Rudy Gobert, the man. Everyone loves to NBA Twitter just wants to pile on Gobert and Tatum because the Celtics won.
Yep.
I don't really have a big takeaway. Like, I think Gobert is going to be fine. He played a little bit better in the gold medal game. I thought he made some big impacts. Not so much offensively, but is there any takeaway from this Gobert? Minutes get cut, hand injury. It sounds like he's going to be fine from a health perspective.
I don't know. I want to say no, there's not any takeaway, but I think we've been pretty like favorable in our coverage of Rudy Gobert over the years. Certainly, this past playoffs, I think we were pretty, pretty favorable in our coverage of Gobert in terms of matchup with Jokic and the impact he was having on Minnesota in terms of winning. It is just simply a truth that his offense is not good enough to guarantee that he's going to be out there in all key moments against all teams, against all opponents. And that in and of itself makes it hard to be as valuable or hold your value over time as you age as all the other players that are sort of compensated similarly to Gobert. And that obviously annoys the hell out of NBA players. So it is what it is. Obviously, if the injury is the reason here, that the minutes were scaled back, fine. But it was certainly, once again, like jarring to see guys like Yabusele have such like an impact compared to Gobert in the Olympics.
Yeah, and his minutes were going to get cut going into it. We heard that that due to matchups they were going to bench him anyways. But obviously, the minutes being that light were because of his injury. You think he would have just played like the non-Wemby's or something to that effect. So I'm not worried. But the age does give me some concern. I'm not going to be too aggressive on him at all because I don't think he can really do much better. And we've seen a little bit of a fall off with the finishing lately. So and then lastly, Josh Giddey played pretty well. Obviously, Sam and I talked about this, so just hit it quickly. His stock is at an all-time low, so had nowhere to go but up. But this is the whole case of Josh Giddey is like, okay, he's a primary ball handler now. We know he could produce statistics. Obviously, he's not maybe a quote-unquote winning player. But hey, this is mostly a fantasy podcast, so we like that. We like production. So I think this is a chance to be optimistic on him.
Yeah, I thought he generally fared well on an Australia team that needed scoring and generally fared well in that lead role. And look, Australia was really, really close to making some hay, thanks to Patty Mills, who just anytime he puts on that jersey, man, he is just in fuego anytime he puts on that jersey. So I thought he did everything that if you're a Bulls fan, if you're a Josh Giddey fan, you would want to see in this Olympics. Australia, knocking on the door of pulling some big upsets there in the medal round and just couldn't quite close. But I thought he played very, very well in everything that I saw from Giddey.
Yep, 100%. And we could segue on Patty Mills, who was signed by the Jazz today, to talk about the Utah Jazz for a little bit. We did get the Lauri Markkanen news signing a $238 million deal over 5 years. Obviously, well worth it. The now we can't be traded, so we'll see what this does. But from Utah's perspective, they have a top 10 protected pick in 2025 that would go to the Thunder. This is from the Derek Favors trade. Shout out to Derek Favors. Um, how much? The biggest question we have for Lauri Markkanen and for fantasy is how much tanking risk is there? Because again, top 10 protected. A lot of teams are at the bottom. It's not going to be easy to be top 10 if Lauri's out there playing every night. They're going to give minutes to Collins, Jordan Clarkson's capable player, Colin Sexton, maybe Keontae George. Like, this is a team, even in the West, that could flirt with top 10, I think. Do you think that what's the level of concern for tanking risk on Lauri?
Let me ask you this. How many teams do you think they're better than in the Western Conference?
Not many.
Maybe
Portland,
I think
sure.
maybe Portland. I'm not even for sure. I'd say maybe Portland. I'd say probably Portland. I shouldn't say maybe. I'd say probably Portland. And then after that, I don't think I have a team that I think they'd be better than in the West.
I agree. Yeah.
So the question is,
but the East, though. I mean, like Brooklyn, right. Washington, Detroit, Charlotte, Chicago.
The thing is, if we're top 10, right? If we're top 10, then you only have 7 teams in the East that are going to be in the lottery, along with 7 teams from the West. So we're real, like, they're in pretty good shape.
They are
most likely, even with Lauri. So I don't think it's a huge risk. Now the in terms of, like, we're going to see Lauri like shut down way early. Now, the thing I will say is, like, because I think they can lose enough with Lauri is the whole point. Like, I don't think they're going to be winning so many games, but we have seen the Jazz be very, very aggressive in late season draft pick management. Let's just put it that way, as the best we can. But remember, this team last year was 26-26. They finished 5-25. The year before, if you go to the year before, they were late in the season at one point, they were, I believe, 30-31. And they finished 37-45. So they are willing to really, really, make themselves weaker down the stretch. Now, they can do that a number of ways without impacting Lauri, right? Like, they can just get rid of some of the veteran players who they have under contract this year, who are just under contract this year and next year before the books are really clear in 26-27. And teams might be interested in Jordan Clarkson at $14 million a year. They might be interested in Colin Sexton at $18-19 million a year as like a bench scorer to kind of loosen things up. They might be interested in John Collins. That depends a little bit on how you feel about, like, if John Collins is having a really good season, teams will be interested because then he's less likely to take that player option that he has next year. I don't know if teams want the $26 million that he has next year on the player option, so they'd want a good John Collins season. But my point being, like, I think if you're asking me, do I think Lauri's going to play 70 games? I do not. If you're asking me, do I think like Lauri's going to be stuck in the 50s because they're tanking really hard? I don't know. I'm not certain of that. So I think our projection on him is like low to mid 60s, if I'm remembering. I'll pull it up now in terms of where we're at currently on him. But it's absolutely something to be considering when you're spending premium picks, which Lauri's going to come with a premium pick because he's a premium player. So we've got him at 62 games right now. And I think that's pretty appropriate, weighing the risk. I think the range on him is probably in the low 50s to the high 60s. I'd be surprised if he got into the 70s this year.
Yeah, and just to point out, I mean, I'm sure you remember the podcast we did around New Year's, talk about how hot the Jazz were. From December 21st to January 15th, they lost 2 games, one at New Orleans and then one at Boston. They won the rest of those games. So they can get hot, and it's partly because Lauri's pretty good. Obviously, Will Hardy's a really, really good coach. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, and then just to go back to it, we don't know who, but there's going to be 1 or 2 teams out of these 30 who have things go horribly wrong, and they're suddenly tanking. So, I don't know. It's certainly, like we said, they're probably in a good position to finish like 4, 5, 6 in the lottery. But if they get hot again, two teams run bad and are tanking it up. It's not as easy as you think, despite how only Portland is like the worst team, worse than them. Because obviously we think San Antonio is really good. I think Houston was pretty legit. I think Sacramento's pretty good. I think the Clippers will still be okay. Pelicans are obviously in a pretty good spot, but it can go bad for them too. So,
and the other thing you have to, when you think about tanking this year, it's layers to this, right? So when we're talking about the Jazz, it's like the protections on their pick, right? But then at some point, it's like the Cooper Flag sweepstakes, and I know there's other good players in this draft as well. But the thing is, I think some of the teams in the East are going to be so bad that Utah is going to have a hard time being within striking distance of that top 3 tier. I think we'll see. And so I think Utah is going to get in this middle range, most likely, where Lauri's games expectation gets into those low mid 60s. The thing that goes bad for you is you could get hit on 2 fronts on this, where they're not worried about the top 10 protection because they're so bad, but hey, now they're close enough to getting into that top 3 area where you're guaranteed the top odds for the lottery that they might be pushing there. I think the teams in the East are going to be so bad that it's not going to be that. But we'll see if that's the case as well.
Yeah. And to your point, they have most of their guys under contract through 2026, but they're pretty team-friendly deals with the cap going up. So, that could be their path, right? Like you still have Lauri, but you lose Collins, you lose Colin Sexton, you lose Clarkson, and they're just playing all these guys, all these kids they've been drafting, a bunch of minutes, and then they have a couple other picks from the Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert trades to have a potentially pretty big draft. I mean, especially if one of those 2 teams faltered, which I think is pretty unlikely. They're both in pretty good spots there. So anything else Jazz-wise before we talk about kind of other teams?
No, I mean, just the build nature of the Jazz. Like, I know on Zach Lowe's podcast, there had been some speculation of like Zach had kind of floated out, like, do the Jazz make sense as like an Ingram team to try to get interest in Ingram, and they'd have like Walker Kessler that would potentially be interesting to New Orleans on the other side of that, and different things like that. I think, just given the history of Danny Ainge, who's generally been very, very patient in his front offices with understanding optionality and windows and not like pushing aggressively the chips in the middle, I think that they're just going to ride this out and continue to just take value where they see value. Like, I think they view Lauri on a $50 million contract in the next 3 seasons as like totally fine to build around. Like he can be your 2 or your 1, depending on the salary on what you get on the other piece, but he can be that, and he allows you a lot of different ways to build because of his flexibility offensively and where he scores and positionally as well. So I don't think they're going to push anything, but you look, and everybody on the roster has a contract with the exception of John Collins' player option that extends through 25-26. So this is the team for the next 2 years. And certainly there's going to be trades and movement because we'd expect that. Like Jordan Clarkson's 32. He doesn't fit the timeline of this team. But there's some guys that are like, Sexton 26, Collins 27, that I'm interested to see what they do. If they gave this, multi-year contract to Svi Mykhailiuk, who's 27, which is interesting. So I'm very interested to see where they go forward from a roster build perspective. I think they're still in the feeling out, finding value mode. I don't think they're in the tactical searching for a specific type of piece to add, like Boston got towards the later ends with Derek White and then Kristaps and so on forth. So I think we're still far away from those things, but I'm interested to see because this roster has everybody under contract for the next 2 years and a lot of picks, a lot of young players to kind of integrate and figure out playing time for. And I'm sure they'll be able to turn Jordan Clarkson into something in the second round pick or something else. But I'm interested to see how they build because like wherever Danny Ainge has gone from a front office perspective, they've been very, very sharp and they've been very patient with how they've taken their time trying to find deals that really, really clearly work for them.
Yep, and they're picking up a ton of assets in the process. So yeah, we'll see if John Collins picks up that player. He's going to do $26.6 million in the last year of his deal. So that'll be That's I think he probably wants to go to hit the market given the way the contracts have looked so far. But
Yeah, because I think for him it would probably be just to get the guaranteed money, because you don't
mhm,
want to, like, this will be his age 27 season, next year's age 28 season. You wouldn't want to have a mediocre age 28 season then be
yeah,
trying to get a 3-4 year deal for 29, 30, 31. So I think he'd be trying to get the 3-year deal, 3-4 year deal for 28, 29, 30, and tap in the guaranteed money. But yeah, I think ultimately, like, 26 is, it just depends on how good he is this year. Like 20, because we saw, some guys, and he's a little bit of a tweener, right? In terms of where he is positionally, 4 or 5, like, he could get squeezed. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of year he has and how that impacts, his free agency decision
yeah.
next year.
And last thing I'll say is, I like Cody Williams. Probably tough to draft him now, with Lauri kind of locked in. I think you could probably take like a 16 teamer, but best ball, all that stuff's pretty thin. We'll see if anything shakes loose there. So I want to talk about the trickle down effects from Lauri kind of being off the market now, and I want to start with the Nets, who are just flushed with fours, who could be traded. Dorian Finney-Smith with an excellent contract, under contract through 2026. Cam Johnson, 2027, pretty decent contract. Boyan, contract year 2025. They also have Schroeder, who's a point guard, obviously. There. So yeah, I'm waiting for the Nets to kind of make some moves here, because I think that they're clear sellers who have similar positions that Lauri was hoping to fit. There was some rumors from Michael Scotto saying that the Cavs were interested at looking like an Isaac Okoro for Dorian kind of swap here. Still waiting on Okoro, who, should mention, that's also a bit of a fallout. Utah locking up that money is going to make them, less likely to steal Okoro from the Cavs here. But are the Nets going to unload before now that they kind of have one more seller kind of off the market? Do you think that this kind of could help them drive the price up on getting some guys off their team?
It's a good question. I think the market for Lowry, in terms of what people were talking about, was all focused around Golden State, right? And the difference was Golden State's asking price versus what Utah was looking for was reportedly a wide gap between the two. And I don't think Golden State's pursuing any of those guys. I don't think they view any of those guys as like difference making from what they were going out. So certainly Brooklyn kind of has control over that market in terms of players that are attractive 3-4s, defensive shooting type options. But those pieces tend to go to like the very like top tier contenders, right? Like, it's not like a second tier contender that's usually like acquiring Dorian Finney-Smith, right? It's like a top tier contender that's like trying to put them over the top. So looking around, and you look at like teams' cap situations and like where they can make moves, there's just not a lot. Like, this new CBA has really restricted a lot of teams' ability to make moves. And so even if you're sort of in the strong position of having the multiple assets to be able to deal, there might not be multiple teams to be able to drive up the market price on these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's harder to get rid of players to contending teams now than it has been in the last, 15 years of the NBA with the new CBA. So I'm not as optimistic that will play out quickly, because I think there's not enough of demand from multiple. Like, I think you need to wait for the season to happen and injuries to happen to create more of a market to then push guys. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody will be very interested specifically in like a Dorian Finney-Smith or a Cam Johnson, and maybe you'll get a good price on one of them individually. But I think most of the teams that would be interested in acquiring can also say like, well, who are we really bidding against right now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's really the thing that we're bidding against right now? And I don't think there's many teams that can make these types of moves that are like top tier contenders. So I think it's going to be a slow market. I think the big markets, the quicker evaluation markets, are going to happen on like big players that are like clear superstar type players. I think it's the role players. I think they might end up being more deadline type acquisitions, because the teams that are selling need to figure out how big of a market that they can draw out of this.
Mm-hmm. And then we'll see if maybe Jeremy Grant is more likely to unload. He has a huge contract though. He's
Very
through.
difficult.
Yeah, 2027, 28 is a player option for 36.4. He'll be, kind of past his prime there. So this is really his last big contract. So he would probably keep that. Obviously, this is way down the line. But yeah, so and then just one more point though, like you look at the teams that are bad besides Grant, like the Wizards don't really have anybody that like moves the needle as a 4. I don't think the Pistons do either. They've got some young players they're kind of invested in. So the Nets are kind of holding all the cards here for play, not all the cards, but they have a lot of the cards.
They have most of the cards.
Yeah, yep. So they're they're the best seller. Like if you want that position, which is again would lower up the market, is a big difference. But yeah, Marvin Bagley's a 5 now. So, but yeah, anything else?
But I guess where we're looking around, you can point to Cleveland as a team that might be interested in making an acquisition. But where else could you point to? The Lakers you could point to as a team but that's more of a I think that's more of a Jeremy Grant than a Dorian Finney-Smith, right? Like I think it's more of and this is where I'm saying like the Dorian Finney-Smith, because of just like having to match salaries, the new CBA and like different restrictions that you have as you get to the aprons, like 1-for-1 player swaps and different things. I think it's so much harder to move these guys than before. And so right now, like looking around, it's like, maybe the Clippers could be interested in these types of players. Maybe Cleveland. Milwaukee's pretty hamstrung with where they are. Boston's pretty tapped out. Knicks are pretty tapped out. Philadelphia, they always can get creative, so maybe they can get creative, but they seem fairly tapped out. Denver's very tapped out. Minnesota's very tapped out. Like I just don't know the market for contending teams, and this is where I think like in some ways, I think Brooklyn, yes, they're in the best position of all these teams, but I just don't know that they're actually going to find some in some of these assets that had a lot of value a few years ago. I think the new CBA has made them less valuable, even though these guys are still on good contracts, just because it's harder to trade them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the point everyone knows, like Steve Ballmer didn't even want to go and pay extra money, So with all that money he has, like they're counting on their stadium and new arena, which looks pretty cool. But yeah, we got some time here. Obviously, there's really no rush to make some trades since, again, as we've been alluding to here, no one really on the market is like a needle moving kind of a player. But injuries happen, you need depth. We found that out quite a bit last year. So yeah, anything else you want to mention on either of these topics we covered today?
No, I think it was good to talk through the Olympics and like I said, don't want to hit panic buttons on the guys who didn't make big impacts, because some of that stuff can be just where teams are in their path. But I thought it was good to talk through those things. Interesting for Lauri, and thankful that, a decision is made and it's not drawn out for us from a projection standpoint on that front. We're in the final stages of, our first full run of best ball rankings and projections. So there will be more news on that coming soon. We'll be very excited to launch, and we'll make sure to keep you guys updated, both on this podcast feed and on Twitter. As always, we appreciate your guys' support. If you'd like to leave us a rating and review on whatever platform you're listening to, if you'd like to check out video versions of these podcasts on Established Run NBA's YouTube channel, you can subscribe over there. But appreciate all the support, and looking forward to, we've spent so much time over the last few weeks working on these projections. I'm really looking forward to get them out there in the wild for people to be able to play with. So I don't have the exact information just yet, but we're a podcast or two away from me having that information to share with everybody.
Yeah, very soon. Perhaps next podcast. We'll have the NBA schedule as well. That should be coming out next couple of days. I don't think we have an official. Maybe I missed that. But yeah, should be great as we're getting ready to hit the slow part. But we'll have the schedule. We'll do a schedule pod like last year. That should be fun to break down. So excited to do that, and appreciate you guys listening. We'll catch you guys next